how does China see Europe? Are they seen as just like a market? Are they seen as friends? Do they want to get closer to Europe, or are they enemies?
Well, definitely China sees Europe as a market, and the importance of Europe as a market has increased. Precisely, China now has very difficult relationship with the United States. If Trump does allow Chinese products to come in, that calculation may change, right? The problem with the Chinese thinking on this is that on the economic side, they see Europe as a market and more important market. On the geopolitical side, they're supporting Russia, right? So how can you have such a split in your economic and geopolitical policies when Russia is invading Ukraine, conducting an active war on the border of Western Europe? So they have to realize that there's a massive inconsistency between its economic motivations and its geopolitical policy.
That's very interesting, because I was reading this Financial Times article the other day, and they were mentioning how the EU sort of want to do this technology transfer.
Yeah.
So China's that essentially have Chinese companies, transfer some technology, and then the EU would subsidize battery production. Yeah. And then I was just thinking, do you think China is actually a threat? Do you think the threat of China is perhaps overstated, especially from a European perspective? Because clearly there's some benefits of aligning with China, and especially Starmer in the UK as well. He's kind of he's sort of pressured to deviate away from China, but there's a large part of him and in pursuing UK's interest to also side with China. So is the threat of China really real? And do you think Europe could perhaps benefit from a more cooperative approach?
On economic matters, and this is true not just in Europe, it's true across the globe. Chinese economy is both a massive opportunity and a competitive threat. That's always true. And it's not just true of China, it's true of Japan, Germany. And so, except that China is much bigger than those countries, and Chinese capabilities are quite wide-ranged, right, from advanced manufacturing to also low-tech manufacturing. So these are the differences between China and these other economies that are more uniform in terms of their product offering. Like, look at Germany, right? So it is a opportunity, but that opportunity is only achievable if you have a degree of level playing field, right? And so the European countries have so far been more interested in getting into the Chinese markets by producing there. Look at Germany. Germany has many automobile factories in China. Volkswagen, Audi, Mercedes. And they, for years and years, they were doing extremely well, right? French companies, so I'm not as familiar with British companies. French companies, nuclear power plant, they were doing extremely well. American companies, GE, GM, they were also doing very well. The Western economies have not been as successful in exporting to China. And that implies a differential economic consequences. When the Chinese economy is very strong, you can benefit from the rise of the Chinese economy by producing in China. But now Chinese economy is slowing down. The Chinese companies are increasingly eager to export because the domestic market is
Mm.
not growing as strongly. So now you have a competition now in a way that we didn't have before. So I think this is the fundamental dilemma facing European economies more than facing American economy.
Mm.
It's almost as if it's a little bit too late. So as you mentioned, you had all these European companies that, were almost greedy. They went there, they gave their technologies, they were looking at the profits, and now they're surpassed, even in, like, talking about electric cars. China has
Yeah.
very high capabilities, and now Europe is looking like they're a step behind.
So I think I think you stated the issue very, very correctly and clearly. The question is, what is the takeaway? What is the diagnostics of the reasons why Europe has ended, is in the current situation it is in? You definitely, so what, I'm more familiar with German cars and German companies. What Germany did was that it used the Chinese market to extend the life of traditional automotive technology, gasoline-driven car. They found a huge market in China. Rather than transitioning to EVs, right? So suppose that, and also Germany actually has made two incredibly bad mistakes. One was to bet on Russia as a source of energy supply, cheap energy, right? And the other bet was betting on the Chinese market, absorbing the gasoline traditional automobile car production. At one point it worked. You have cheap energy, and then you have a incredible market to sell into that market. But over the longer run, the problem was that is that this addiction to traditional industries is coming back to haunt them. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, it is more about the European entrepreneurial ecosystem rather than placing the wrong bets. Because even when you place wrong bets, if you have very strong entrepreneurs, you can still have new industries coming from entrepreneurial startups. This is where Europe has failed, right? So if you look at the United States, it wasn't Ford, it wasn't GM that created EVs. It was Tesla, right? It was a company that nobody heard of maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. I don't remember when Tesla was created. If you look at Ford and GM, those companies, they made exactly the same mistake as Audi, Volkswagen, and Mercedes. They extended the lifeline of their traditional car models in China as well as within the United States. But you had Elon Musk, who came along to challenge that model. And you had US government supporting, at that time, Elon Musk. And you have American venture capital industry supporting Tesla. And Tesla succeeded. China BYD. BYD was a new company, was an entrepreneurial company. It was not the traditional car companies in China that made the transition from traditional cars to EVs. It requires a new player, able and willing to challenge existing players. And Europe, as far as I know, and Germany in particular, never had that. That was the problem. So you can't quite blame everything on Russia or on China.
Mm.